Once again, guys, today I'm going to continue the sculpture. This is starting to materialize. Remember in the first video I decided to do just a structure. So I'm trying to break my sculptures into 3 sections. This is going to be the second video, so I'm going to concentrate on the gesture and the theming. I've already kind of worked out the proportions and the structure in the first video. If you need a reference, just look in the video below. But I'm going to continue with this, and you can see I'm still using very large tools. The large tools let me work on things without adding too much detail. I think if you go into small tools right away, you will make more mistakes. The scraping tool works great for blending muscle groups together. And I'm using this wooden stick that I filed, and that works pretty well to get into the smaller sections to add clay. With this sculpture, I've been adding more and more clay, and I still have not dug into the sculpture. I'm probably going to do that in the next session, because when you add a hollow inside a sculpture that's solid like this, what tends to happen is that the sculpture will firm up a lot harder, or a lot sooner, I should say. So I don't want it to be like that yet. I want it to have some play so it can still feel like it's paint. This sort of water-based clay very much feels like I'm painting rather than sculpting. And if you guys are wondering, the clay that I use, it's pretty much based on location. You could make your own clay. It's very easy. Go to a lake or a riverbed and just dig up some of that soil. You have to filter it, but I get it at the local ceramics place. This one is called Virginia Red, and it's the important thing to note when you buy this sort of clay is that it's low fire, cone 6 I believe, and has grog. They do have white clay if you prefer. I kind of like the look of the red clay. So I'm adding a little bit more to the face. I'm going to add some of the hair. At this point, I haven't figured out the theming yet, but with the hair, at least I can add a little bit of structure around the neck. She has a thick neck because of the fat, but necks are very thin compared to the head. The head gets kind of heavy. So when you have hair, you can use the hair as the structure. Now I'm adding the tibia. The tibia, by the way, the bone should curve slightly, and I think mine are still a little bit too straight. And her legs are a little bit too thin, especially the thighs. So I'm going to increase it little by little, adding a little bit more clay. I use this cloth, which is one of my favorites. It's a shop towel that you get at your auto store to clean your car, and it works really great to blend the clay together. Spray some water and then just work it. And now I'm adding a little bit of the hair, the head. I want to make sure I add some structure to the back of the head. I don't want it to be too narrow. That's one of the dangers in the beginning, is that you make the head a little bit on the narrow side. By the way, somebody asked me, how do I keep the clay wet over a period of several days and weeks? And if you watch the end, I always put a bag over the clay, because that's how you keep moisture inside. The better you seal it, the better. The water will stay in. Sometimes if you leave a sculpture for a very long period, you will require to go in and kind of spray water, but most of the time, this water-based clay will stay moist with just a bag over it. And I'm using more and more my silicone tools. I like these flat silicone tools that I got at a ceramics place. And I keep using the same one over and over. It's a flat. I really like that because it gives me a geometric sort of shape. And at the same time, it feels like I'm painting. So I'm adding a bit of detail to the head. I want to make the nose just a little bit larger. I need to make a little bit more fat around the cheeks and, of course, the double neck. The brush works well because you can't really get into several parts of the anatomy in the face. At this size with large tools, so a flat and a round brush I'm using. The round brush is more of a bristle brush from oil painting. It's rather stiff, so at this point when the clay is still this watery, I can manipulate it and push it and give it brush strokes and make it look like a painting just using that. And then I go in with a flat one and I blend all the muscle groups together in the head. This flat tool is kind of like a dental tool. I recommend people get those, especially for oil clay. Oil clay requires a little bit stiffer tools, but because you're working at this small size with the head, you require small tools to get into the eyes, to the upper lids, the lower lids. And at this point, you want to think about what you want to convey with a sculpture. There's people who are very good at portraiture. I'm not one of them. I kind of struggle a lot with portraiture. So I have to take a whole lot more time to create a face than most sculptors. So I decided on a theme based on a comment that I got on the YouTube channel, and that is wings to her head. But instead of wings, I'm going to add a helmet, the theme of Hermes, the god of war. I believe that's the god of war. And I am just going to make the wings kind of stick out. I looked for several helmets online and I found one design that I like, which is kind of like a Hermes Viking helmet. So I'm going to go with that. I just think it looks pretty neat. If you look closely on the sculpture, you'll see the grog component to this clay. There's two types of clay that you can get. It's non-grog and grog. The grog, it's these fire particles that is mixed into the clay that helps the firing and gives its strength to the clay. And with addition to that, the clay doesn't shrink as much. When all the water leaves these clay sculptures, the sculpture itself shrinks a little bit, and with grog, it shrinks less. I believe there's like a 6 or 4 to 5% shrinkage with some clays. I'm not sure which one this is, but they all shrink because the water disappears, so the clay will shrink. And at that time, that's when crackage happens. That's why you don't want to have anything inside. If you have it completely solid, it could crack. And also, if you have an armature inside, at that point, it could crack because it's going to just get much tighter, so it'll break. I changed the lighting here because it's a little bit earlier in the day. I do have a light that I tend to shine on the sculptures. And here's my container for water. And that's how I usually blend things. I put water in a little container and then I just blend it. But you can see the way it behaves. It feels very much like a painting. I'm blending all the muscles together to create a little bit more of a realistic look, but at the same time, I don't want to make it too realistic. One of the things I struggle is trying to create too much realism, but sometimes having something a little bit unfinished, I think looks good. So one of the things that I think most people should do is try to stay away from the perfect sculpture. You see a lot of this in oil-based clay or toy makers. It is simply kind of robotic. But when you have something like this that is more fluid and with water clay, it lends itself really well to making a sculpture that resembles that it was done by a human as opposed to a 3D printer. Now I'm adding some of the buttons in the helmet. You can see the wings already going in. I'm not going to do too much with the wings just yet. I'm going to let it dry a bit. One of the things that you're going to find is that the wings, for example, because they stick out and they're kind of flat, it's going to dry out much quicker. You have to always keep that in mind when you're working on it. So I straightened up this arm. I need to thicken it up. and make the arm just slightly bigger. And at this point, I'm just going to add a little bit more mass to that elbow area where the fat folds are kind of coming together, and maybe even exaggerate some of the fat folds. So you can kind of see she's kind of pushing in her breasts. And I'm just going to continue adding a little bit more clay. I'm going to go back to using my shop towel and blend the muscle groups together. This works really well when you want to get into the round places, like say the gastrocnemius muscle in the lower leg. You can just use your finger and you can kind of feel the lumps on the clay, and you can blend everything together. Because a lot of times you can't get back in the leg, so it's very difficult to blend things together with any other tool. I'm going to add a little bit more size to that right arm. It's getting too thin. And I'm just going to try and match the proportions now. Now we have two dimples in the back. The dimples are actually the posterior iliac crest of the hips. And normally the bones actually come out. They do come out. But when you have so much fat, it goes in. You see this even in thin models that have a little bit more fat around the hips. You'll see dimples, but that's exactly where the hip is, the iliac spine of the hip. Now I'm kind of blending it all together. Even though I'm blending things together, I don't plan on keeping it this blended. I like the look of the clay a little bit unfinished. My sculpture table rises up, and you have to kind of vary up the height. If you want to sculpt, say, the bottom of the nose, you have to get very low and look up. Always get in the habit as a sculptor to look at things in very advantages. That's the problem with it working from reference to the reference, is that you don't get that. So you have to rely a lot on anatomy. So you might have to bring up other reference that's not related to the sculpture, just so you can figure out the anatomy. But work in different vantage points if you can. The sculpture is starting to come together, as you can see, and I plan on adding or working a few more sessions on it. But it's going to be, it's a little bit different. I think this is the second larger model I've done. I've always enjoyed working with larger models, even in live classes. They are extremely fun to draw, lots of things, but usually sculpting requires much more clay. So since I'm so cheap, I try to get models who are thin. So I'm blending a little bit of the arm, and I'm pretty much done for today. And the next session, I am going to finalize the entire sculpture, hollow out the insides, and then prepare it for firing. And then I'll do a couple more videos on the process of firing and painting the sculpture. I'm adding a bag over it. This is how I keep the sculpture nice and wet when I'm working on it. It works extremely well. You don't have to do too much. But that's pretty much it. If you liked the video, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next session. Thanks for watching.